You're listening to the No Schedule Man podcast with Kevin Bulmer, exploring real stories and lessons learned with a variety of special guests. To learn more about Kevin and to access other episodes of the podcast, please visit noscheduleman.com and connect and contribute at No Schedule Man on Twitter or Instagram and on Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud, all /No Schedule Man. Thanks for listening and enjoy the No Schedule Man podcast.
I've been known to struggle with reality. Not that it is any real mystery.
Hi, and welcome to the show. I'm Kevin. Thanks so much for taking some time to join me. Our guest today is Jason MacKenzie. Jason is an author, a speaker, and a coach who teaches people how to find the courage to create new and deeper relationships with people, including their kids, maybe even especially their kids. And if they want to use those relationships to power personal and professional growth, he shows them how to do that too. The formula: vulnerability plus authenticity plus confidence. You put all those together and put those into action in your daily life, well, it's worked wonders for Jason, as you're about to hear, and he has had a really long road to travel. Jason is a survivor of his first wife's battle with bipolar disorder and subsequent suicide. He's also overcome a decade-long battle with alcohol. Eventually, he stopped running from grief and fear, which allowed him to become the husband and the father that he is today. A big part of that is a blog site for journaling about gratitude, and he does training journals on there as well, and also curates the stories of other people, called The Book of Open. You can find it at thebookofopen.com online, and Jason's going to talk about that and how that whole idea came to be. Cultivating that site and contributing to it eventually led to his first book, which is called The Dadly Book of Open: How Cultivating Vulnerability Makes You a Stronger, Wiser, and More Courageous Father. He put that book together with the help of Hogan Hilling, and again, he tells the story in this conversation, which is coming up in just a moment, of how all of that came to be. So much of Jason's story resonates very clearly with me personally. Things like growing up with an idea of leading a, quote, stereotypical life. I would call that following the script, or what we think in our minds that script is supposed to be. And things like the idea that, real guys, real men suck it up and push their feelings down and move on and just deal with stuff. I certainly felt that way. His battle with alcohol and the way that it fit into his life sounds very similar to mine. And the fact that he woke up to embrace and share his authentic self only fairly recently is also something that I can relate to, and perhaps maybe you can too. Now, having said that, Jason's path has taken some twists and turns, both really, really good and completely crushingly awful, and I've already mentioned a couple of those things. And those are some of the things that I have not experienced. He describes them in very candid fashion in this discussion. Here are a few key takeaways to listen for in the chat with Jason MacKenzie. Number one, growing together. We discussed this at a few different points in the conversation, related not just to parents and their kids, but with their parents as well. Now, as opposed to one being more sort of authoritative than the other, seems like Jason and I agree that we're all discovering together from where we are at our respective point in our respective journeys. At least that seems to be true for Jason and his family, and I can certainly say the same. Everyone growing together as the generations continue to turn. Another thing, you'll know when it's time for you to know. His description of the peace and the clarity of the moment when he knew that he was done drinking also describes the moment when I knew I was done. The way that he talks about it, listen for it in the conversation, I could take it almost word for word and make that a description of the time in my life that I just suddenly knew that my first marriage was over and that it was okay. It's a great example of how, with any large, looming issue in your life that you're not sure how to handle and it's tearing you apart inside, you will know when it's time. You'll just know. And when that time arrives, you'll know that you know it. Number 3, the power of vulnerability. Authentically sharing our true selves with others almost never pushes other people away. We think it does. It's such an easy trap to fall into. It has the reverse effect. It almost always acts like a magnet, bringing us closer together. So why are so many of us so prone to living what I would call a movie set life, where we think that we can only show what we feel is our best side to other people? Everyone has something that they're struggling with, something that maybe they're hiding or don't wish to talk about, or something that's hurting them or they're hurting from. And so when someone else comes along and shares and listens authentically and with non-judgment and kindness, I think, and it seems like Jason agrees, there's no greater way to deepen or create a connection with another human being than that. Jason has discovered this, and you'll clearly hear that in this discussion. And one other thing real quick, perseverance. Jason does a terrific job of describing the process of actually creating the book and what it took. These things don't just magically appear out of the air. So anything that you're looking to do in your life or create or have or be, it's going to take some perseverance. There's going to be a process. It's going to be a journey to get there. Listen to that part carefully. It's an important lesson for just about anything that you'll do in life. I hope you enjoy it and you grab some valuable takeaways from this. I'm sure that you will. Here's my conversation with Jason MacKenzie on the No Schedule Man podcast. Jason, when you reflect back on it, what are some of the things that immediately come to mind about how being a father looks different in your mind now than it may have when you were younger?
Well, that's a great question. By younger, do you mean younger as in prior to kids?
Well, that evolves as we go, doesn't it? I left it deliberately vague because I wanted you to be able to choose at what point you wanted to jump off. So we could maybe take this in stages, maybe even when you were a kid, what you perceived fatherhood to be and how that evolved through the course of the journey.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess my example was obviously my own dad, who was always there for me. I mean, he was a committed father. He worked a second job so we could play hockey. We never had a lot of money, but for me, it was always, I guess my model was that my dad was present. My parents got along well, and I had a pretty stable upbringing. Not a lot of, I would say, emotional development. Like we didn't talk deeply about things. It was because that's just not his way. And so, I mean, that's probably how it started. I always had the feeling that when I had kids, that I would want to be there for them and I would want to be a present father. And then I think as it evolved, I mean, I can remember moving forward to when I actually had kids, I think that for me, what was important at that time, I was in a phase of my life where I was, climbing the corporate ladder and living a pretty stereotypical life of what I thought, the life I thought I was supposed to live, I guess is the best way to put it. So, I wanted my kids to have the things that I thought my success should make available to them. When I say success, that's in air quotes. So let's say a pool, a nice house, the stuff that they wanted, that kind of stuff. And I was providing that for them, but it's very different now. I mean, now my daughter's 13, my oldest daughter's 13, and my youngest daughter's just about to turn 12. And it's much more now about an emotional connection and openness and transparency and vulnerability and helping them see through my honesty that how my experiences can help them make more informed choices about their life. So I think that's what I would say. It's a much more emotional relationship now. And I recognize, how powerful it is for me to model, the ideas and how to live vulnerability and authenticity and confidence and open-mindedness and non-judgment. So, and I'm happy. I don't see that changing. Those fundamental foundations, I think, will be in place forever. The things I'm interested in might change. The things I'm doing might change, but my life will always revolve, and my relationship with them will always revolve around those concepts.
Are your parents still around?
Yes, they are. Literally just around the corner.
Oh, you never know. I maybe worded that somewhat insensitively, and what I meant was, still with us and still living, because you never know. But the reason why I ask that, I'm curious, Jason, about how this evolution that you've just described may have thrown your relationship or perspective of them, both as people and maybe as parents, into a slightly different light, if at all.
Yeah, that's a great question too. I think my relationship with my parents has changed. I mean, as I have I think it's not so much as a result. Like my relationship with my kids is really almost a byproduct of my own personal journey, into becoming more self-aware and all of those things. And so all of my relationships have changed, including the relationship with my parents. And I think that I value them more than I ever have. I think this is probably a pretty common theme, as we're teenagers, I certainly didn't value them at all. And as time passes and I, become my own man and, sort of forge ahead in my own path, I value my parents more. And I think that as I'm starting to do the things that I'm doing now, I think they are living, I don't want to say vicariously through me, but I think that our relationship is it's a two-way relationship. So the things that I'm learning that maybe they weren't able to provide for me, they're open to learning those things along with me. So I appreciate them more than I ever have. And it's great. They're wonderful parents. They're great grandparents. And I really value our relationship more than I ever have. And I think that will continue.
I've found that, and to your point about being a teenager and not really valuing them, I guess I valued mine. I just figured that I knew better than they did.
Sure.
But then as it's gone along, part of my experience has been, and I wonder if yours is at all similar, has been through my personal evolution as a parent myself. I've gone from viewing my own parents as from parents more to people, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And looking through it as, because they're larger than life figures when we're little. At least they were to me, that you think have all the answers and just you follow in that path into that, what you described as kind of stereotypical life. And then all of a sudden the world starts to beat you up a little bit, and it throws what your parents went through trying to raise you in a bit of a different context all of a sudden, doesn't it?
It really does, and that's a really interesting way of looking at it, because you're right. I mean, very few people get through life without it throwing many curveballs at us. And I think that for me, through some of the, I would say fairly significant curveballs life throughout me, I mean, my parents were always there for me. And I don't know what I would have done without them, to be honest with you, at certain points in my life. And so, yeah, I mean, I do see them. But you're right. I mean, the relationship has changed. They'll always obviously be my parents, but we're equals. Yeah, more so now than ever. And the conversations we have reflect that. So it's an exchange of ideas, meaningful dialogue about things that are important to both of us. And we're growing together, We're different, very different people, but we're growing together. And I feel like one of the wonderful byproducts of my own personal evolution is that they are evolving too as a result of the things that I am learning, and vice versa. And I see that in all my relationships too, right? Where they're very it's a really good two-way relationship where we are, bringing value to each other. So yeah, and that exists with my parents too. It's great.
Let's talk a little bit, if we could, Jason, about the stage from maybe teenager age into your early 20s, when you were kind of on your way into what we've both described as that sort of stereotypical life. So on your way to eventual fatherhood and getting into the professional working world, what do you remember about what was sort of in your heart and mind, and what you thought you were chasing at that point?
I thought I was chasing, I don't think that I was actually chasing anything. I think that I was running from poverty more so than anything else. So I didn't have a vision of where I wanted to take my life. All I really knew is that I wanted to not be poor. And I'm not we didn't have a lot of money when we were growing up, but we weren't poor. I would say my dad was in the military. I mean, it's not like money was, we were never going to be homeless or anything, but money was something that needed to be monitored closely. So that's what I was most afraid of. And it took me a while to escape that, really, because of some of the choices that I made. So when I was in high school, I didn't have any vision. I really just showed up and punched the clock basically, and, sort of got through it. I went to college for 2 weeks, quit. I joined the military for a little while. And I got out of the military, and then I started college again and quit. And I worked a series of low, minimum wage jobs, and I really didn't see a path forward for myself at all, actually. And, until eventually when I was, say 24, 25 years old, I went back to school, and this time it took, and I finished. But, I had nothing. I knew I wanted to be, I would look at people and the that resonated with me were the traditional images that probably resonate with most young people. Material things, career success, admiration from people because of the material things and career success you had. That's what, if I was chasing anything, that's what it was. But for a lot of that period of my life, it was such a nebulous concept, or it really seemed out of my reach. And I really felt like people who achieved it were, had some kind of special sauce that I didn't have.
When you went back to school and the time that it caught when you were in your mid-20s, what was that for?
The program was, software development, computer programming. But really what had happened was my first wife, the incentive to go back to school was that it wasn't because I had this burning passion to be a computer programmer. It was because my wife had applied to become an Ontario Provincial Police Constable, and she was university educated. And I really thought there was a pretty good chance she was going to get on the job. She was going to get hired. And I was thinking to myself, I don't want to be the spouse of a cop, who's basically delivering pizza. That doesn't feel good to me. So I felt like I better go back and do something. And at that time, which was in sort of the mid to late 1990s, software development seemed like a surefire way to, land a decent job and have a good career.
It sounds like the choice to do that then was still made somewhat, I'll say, pragmatically, for lack of a better word. Sorry, I just talked over top of you and I didn't catch what you just said.
I said flippantly, which is probably more what it was.
Well, it sounds as if you put enough thought into it, Jason, to think that there may be some opportunity, but the way that I heard it was that the opportunity was along the lines of what you described earlier, that there may be some sense of value there that may be measured externally, but that wasn't really something that was going to necessarily resonate with who you are, which it also really sounds like you didn't exactly know who that was yet. Is that fair?
Yeah, the term of, resonance or following your passion, I didn't even know what that meant. Honestly, I had a traditional upbringing and I really had a limited set of options that were available to me. And honestly, at that point, it was the beginning of the internet. Things were still very new. The options were more limited than they are now. My kids are going to have an entirely different suite of opportunities available for them to create on their own and, go off the beaten, the traditional path and do something that's totally different and unique to them. I could have done that at the time, but it's just so much more achievable now.
It is a different world. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And it's going to be interesting to see, as just a quick tangent here, I think, going back to where we were a few minutes ago, Jason, about how I perceive that the generations are starting to turn and communicate differently. Like, for instance, when you talked about how we have begun to maybe view our parents a little bit differently or evolve together, I've often asked my mom about how she thinks maybe her relationship with her mother might have been different if, they had been able to be Facebook friends or text each other, or she doesn't know, or I'll put it this way, her granddaughter doesn't know a world any different than being able to just click an icon on an iPad and there's Grammy's face all of a sudden. And so the world is evolving differently. But so on one hand, I think maybe we're slowly developing ourselves emotionally somewhat. But at the same time, there's so much noise and so many more tools and avenues available to us. I think that that's both good and bad, and I'm not sure which side I believe in more. Probably the good, because that's the way that I lean. But do you see what I'm getting at there?
I do, and I think it's important. The technology and the tools that are available are only there to enable, a solid foundation. So as parents, our job is to teach our kids the fundamental concepts of, how they possess the power through their choices to create the life they want, about how to treat other people, about how to connect with other people, how to see opportunities, how to think non-linearly, how, all of these things. These are the fundamental skills that we need to teach our kids. And then we need to let them understand how to use technology to realize that foundation. And when you combine those two things together, it's very, very powerful. And for me personally, I can't wait to see what my kids do, with that knowledge and the opportunities they create.
I want to fill in a little bit more of the backstory in terms of how we got to the Jason MacKenzie that just showed up there within the last 2 minutes that delivered some of that great, those great ideas for us to be, and we're going to get there. But I jumped when I asked you about your schooling. I jumped past where you had first got married. Can you take me back into that point of the story, and then we'll get up to the the reinvention here. But tell me about how the first marriage came about.
Yeah, so I had shortly after when I joined the military, I met the woman who would become my wife. It was at basically a summer camp in the military sort of thing, and yeah, we just kind of fell in love. We had a long distance relationship for a little while, and then we moved in together. And getting married was, I was young. I was 24 years old, and but we had been together for 5 years at that point, I guess, and it felt like the right thing to do. And in a lot of ways, it was the right thing to do. So we actually got married in a preacher's rose garden, and he actually had a wooden leg. Like, it was quite a story, really. But yeah, it felt right. She was the first person I had been with for that long, first person I had lived with, and we were really good friends, on top of the love that we had for each other. So, and we really, I think that as we kind of came through university and kind of joined the workforce, and I was going to college. We really felt really optimistic about our future, which it's a really exciting feeling, when you're that young and you've kind of had some difficult lean years of, starving student kind of thing. And just to be able to look onto the horizon and see that the work and the decisions, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, and see that there's a good possibility that they're going to start to pay off somehow. It was a really energizing, exciting feeling. And we didn't have many obligations, right? We had no kids, we had no debt, we had no house, we could just move where we wanted to. And I'm glad that I celebrated that time as much as I did while it was happening, because it's just, there's no time really like it in your life,
At what point did it start to change?
It started to change. Well, fundamentally it started to change, like, irrevocably, I guess, after the birth of our second daughter. But looking back on the time before, times previous to that, I guess there'd always been red flags there. But I didn't have the life experience or context or knowledge or education to be able to see what those red flags were. And honestly, I just wanted things to be good, right? And and the thing is, like, 99% of the time they were phenomenal. So, I just didn't see what was happening. I didn't have the tools. Then after the birth of our second daughter, so Cindy was a police officer at that time, and she went rapidly downhill. Downhill is not even a word to describe it, really, but she started to make very irrational decisions. She started to become very angry, like rage, saying horrible things, disappearing for days on end, losing like 30 to 35% of her body weight, because, as I found out later, she was surviving on Xanax, like anti-anxiety medication, and vodka that she was hiding all over the house. And she spent us, within a period of a few months, our solid financial future, she spent us into, near bankruptcy. And I just had no idea what was happening. She no longer slept. She would stay awake for days, and then until she physically collapsed. The house was just constantly disorganized. A million projects going on at the time, none of them that ever got finished. And so I'm looking at this, and I'm basically watching what looks like the self-destruction of my wife. And so ultimately, 6 months later, finally got her to go to a psychiatrist or a doctor, and then went to a psychiatrist, and psychiatrist diagnosed her with bipolar disorder, which is, just for the benefit of anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's also, or was previously called, manic depression. And it's a mental illness that is characterized by either periods of, and she was an extreme case, or, a very serious case. Obviously there's this, spectrum, but it's characterized by periods of like soul crushing depression. And for me, as someone who had very little life experience, and had never really been around mental illness, I had no idea what depression was. I thought, naively that depression was weakness. Just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. I mean, it's just a matter of willpower, until I witnessed it firsthand. And it is soul destroying, inconsolable mental anguish. And to see somebody suffer like that was horrific. But that, honestly, as bad as the depression was, it wasn't nearly as bad as the manic part, because the manic part was all those behaviors I described earlier. So, just reckless, self-destructive, horrific behaviors that in her mind made perfect sense, because people who are suffering from the manic part of bipolar, they have delusions of grandeur, right? They think that they have these crazy ideas, and they really believe that they make sense, and they don't. And then when people, don't go along with their ideas or try to stop them, they lash out viciously, and usually with the people that are closest to them, which in this case was me. So, that behavior went on for the next, 5-6 years. I mean, she just one day decided she was moving away. We had a daughter who was 6 months old, maybe 9 months old. And my older daughter was maybe 2.5 or something. And she just moved 3 hours away one day, packed up all her stuff and left for 5 months, left me with the kids. And, and then she came home, and she became suicidal, and she ended up in institutionalized. And I mean, got electroshock therapy. There was a time she was in a homeless shelter. I mean, it was just nonstop disaster, basically, and I'm trying to keep her alive. I'm trying to keep my kids, raise my kids and keep them safe. And I'm trying to keep sane myself, because there's a lot of times, man, during that period where I thought I was going crazy myself, just because everything was, I did not know what was going to happen from one day to the next. And ultimately we separated shortly before her death. And ultimately she ended up committing suicide, but just about 7 years ago now. And I think for her, obviously part of it, I mean, people who haven't experienced this firsthand, they have a specific, you hear some, throwaway lines about suicide, like, oh, it's the most selfish thing you can do and whatever. But I mean, you can't even imagine, unless you've either experienced it firsthand or witnessed someone that you love go through it, how horrific mental illness can be. And I think in her mind, as I said, we had separated, and I think that she wanted to end her pain, obviously, but at that point in her life, she had nothing left. I mean, this is the terrible part about mental illness and bipolar disorder, is that the decisions you make have devastating real life consequences. So near the end of her life, her friends had didn't talk to her anymore, and it wasn't because they hated her. It was because they had to protect themselves from her. And it's not that they bore her any ill will. It's just that they had their own lives, and she was never going to be able to go back to policing. She was on disability. The kids were always with me. So I think that aside from ending her own pain, I know this, that the only gift she had left to give in her mind was to give us our freedom, right? Our freedom to move on, our freedom to end the chaos and try to, start rebuilding another life. And that's how I choose to look at it, man. Was that it was, instead of it being selfish, I think it was in her mind an incredibly selfless act.
To what extent were you ever able to get any kind of instruction or clarity on what might have brought that on with such force, Jason?
Oh, well, you know what? I mean, it was an evolving learning process. I mean, her family, this wasn't the first sort of sign of mental illness. I mean, she had struggled with bulimia when she was younger, but she conquered that really many, many years before. So, her family had a history of mental illness. So that was one thing. I think that as I found out, as time progressed, I mean, she had an exceptionally horrible childhood where there was sexual abuse involved and all of these things. And she never, ever told me about it. We were together for 16 years and she never told me about it. And I think that those are demons that you cannot outrun. They will catch you eventually. And, it was a And they did, so I don't know quite how to answer that question other than to say it was a complicated mosaic of factors. That's basically what it was. I mean, I don't think you can point to one specific thing, right? So, I mean, it's just everything, all of those things caught up to her and, took her down, basically.
You described, with what I'll say, I think is probably hindsight and experience, what was going on pretty eloquently, I think. But as I was listening to you talk about that really tumultuous time, Jason, I'm sitting here thinking, well, he's got the benefit of the hindsight and the experience that he didn't have when he was going through it. What was it like to be inside your own mind and skin when you were going through it?
It was awful. And, it's funny because I think with the benefit of time and space and hindsight, I appreciate how hard it was more now than I did because, I think you have to remember that this went on for 6 years. So I stopped remembering what normal even was.
Yeah.
It became a really distant memory. And it sounds, cliche about, just try to get through the day. But I didn't really think of it in those terms, but there was no other way to look at it. I had no, sometimes it was just like, oh my God, she just pulled in the driveway. I just need to get through the next 5 minutes, but but for me, what I think really my thought process at the time was I didn't really talk about it, because what was happening to me for a couple of reasons. One, I had a really traditional view of what it meant to be a strong man, and strong men handle shit. They deal with the challenges that they face. They don't cry to their friends or to people about how difficult things are. They man up and they get it done. And I thought emotions were weakness. So, which of course they're not. But at the time I thought that. So when I would have a normal reaction to extreme stress, like a anxiety attack, or, I'd break down crying, or I'd blurt out my life story to the lady behind me at the grocery store when she asked me the price of strawberries. I would see that as, warning signs that instead of a normal, healthy, reaction to that extreme stress, I saw it as weakness. I saw it as cracks appearing in the dam. And I was the only person who was trying to keep things somewhat together here, So in order to deal with those emotions, well, actually, then I'll also say I didn't talk about it really very much because no amount of talking about it would do anything to make her not sick, right? So, I had more pressing issues to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So I eventually turned to alcohol and just started drinking my fears and anxiety and stress and sadness and grief away. And it in a weird way, it seemed to be working because I felt less of all of those things, but I also felt less happiness and joy and optimism and hope and gratitude. And all those things were already in really short supply, and I needed them the most at that point in my life. So, you can't selectively numb your emotions. You numb them all. And that plagued me for quite a while, even after her death. So, and I made some horrific mistakes, man. I did some things that I never used to tell people the story, but I think it's much more important to tell it. I was unfaithful to her while she was locked up in a mental institution. I was so desperate and lonely and sad and drunk. And, but the thing is, you can look at a situation like that and you can say, okay, well, geez, there's some mitigating circumstances, but it doesn't change the fact that I had to look at myself in the mirror the next morning and said, I'm the guy. I am on top of everything else. Now I have become the type of person that does this. And it made dealing with every one of my tomorrows more difficult. Right. And I said some horrible things to her and just fits of anger and hurt and all of that stuff. And, so I never, for quite a while after it happened, and even while during, if I did talk about it, I really talked about a heroic version of me, right? I stood by my wife and, I was there and I did do a lot of things that I was proud of, many, many things I was proud of, but I made some huge mistakes and I don't run from those anymore. I embrace them and I know that, sharing them is a way to be a huge service to other people. So, Yeah, it was a really interesting and narrow existence in a lot of ways.
I'm almost viewing this story in two parts, and we've been focusing all on the first part. And forgive me, Jason, that's too glib of a way to put it, but for want of a much better way to phrase that, because when we get to the Jason MacKenzie that I'm talking to now, that has this perspective and that has really uncovered and shared and mined and learned about vulnerability and choice and connection and opportunities and all these kinds of things that we're going to get to. At what point, if I can carry along that thread I've established there, poor though the vocabulary may be, and I'll own that, at what point did part one start to transition into part two? And what were the catalysts for that?
Part one transitioned into part two really in the summer of 2014. And I mean, so it really wasn't that long ago, coming up on 3 years ago. But yeah, I was living a life of, I was drinking every night. It's funny because I had a lot of things I could use to rationalize my behavior. I could say, I've been through hell. I've raised these kids through hell. I've remarried. I built built a new family, like Phoenix rising from the ashes, to use an analogy that will resonate with you.
Sure.
And I'm fit. I work out. I have a good job. And so if I drink all the time, hey man, maybe other people should drink. These are actually what I would say to myself. Maybe other people should drink all the time, so they could be great like me. And ultimately, it was my wife, my new wife, my amazing new wife, and the mother of our kids, the woman who became the mother of our kids. Is, she started to pressure me from a place of love, right? Like, I mean, not like just telling me that I was selling myself short, basically. I didn't want to hear it at all. I was so wrapped up in this web of rationalizations and lies to myself and fear that I didn't want to hear it. And ultimately, it took a moment in the summer of 2014 where I had a day with my daughter, my younger daughter, who was 9 at the time, and it was a special day, just the two of us. My wife and my older daughter were going somewhere, and it's gonna be a daddy-daughter day, and I really had hyped it up, and it was gonna be special. And when that day came around, I waited till 11 o'clock and just started drinking, and basically drank the whole day. And she played by herself, and my wife came home. She talked to her, and Melody, my amazing 9-year-old, came up and looked me in the face and told me she was disappointed. And, for me, I mean, we all have our own, moments, I guess, watershed moments. But for me, that was the one thing I could not rationalize away, because I'd always told it. And like I always told everybody what an amazing father I was. And you know what? There was in a lot of ways, I was a super involved, super just present dad, but I drank way too much, man, And so, but when she said that to me, that shattered that illusion that I was a great father, and that was one of the few things I really hung my hat on, and so that was by for sure the lowest point of my life. And I went downstairs and I passed out on the couch, just full of shame and regret. And I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. Sounds so weird, but it's actually what happened. I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I felt like I was having an anxiety attack. But I also knew that then this like peace came over me, this, I don't know, sense of peace or whatever, clarity. And I just knew I was done drinking. And which was the craziest thing, because I had no historical basis to believe that I would be done drinking. I had tried and stopped, like I tried to quit a million times and failed every time until this time. And that was it. So I haven't touched a drop since, and I never will. I never have had any desire to. I've hardly even thought about it other than, wow, I'm so glad I don't drink anymore. But, and that really unleashed changed the trajectory of my life. And it was obviously partially because I created a lot more time and space for myself and presence by not being drunk, but it also, the process of starting to live a sober life shattered a whole bunch of fears, or made me realize that a whole bunch of fears that I had were completely made up. And I'd really been imprisoning myself, like all these things that people, you probably went through this too, to a certain extent, where, how am I going to socialize? So many of my relationships are, revolved around, drinking with people, right? How am I going to even talk to them? Are the people still going to like me? Or maybe what if I've actually already reached the limit of my capabilities and I quit drinking and now I'm just the same guy, except now I can't get drunk anymore. Life's going to suck like that, right? So all of these fears, and none of them came true. In fact, the opposite happened. My relationships deepened. I started to expand my horizons. I became more optimistic. And I started thinking to myself, wow, if these fears were made up, it was like this complete expansionist sort of moment where I thought to myself, if these fears were made up, what other fears what have I made up? What other self-limiting, limiting beliefs do I have? And that just started me to start questioning everything. And it also gave me the courage to start sharing my story, because I started thinking, holy man, this is quite the story. I feel like I should tell people about it, and not the heroic version, right? But the real version with some of the stuff that I just told you earlier. And then what happened was, my original intention actually was pretty narrow. I'm going to share my story because I think that it might help people who are struggling with mental illness themselves, or know a loved one who's struggling with mental illness, or maybe people who have an addiction. But it was so much more than that. As I started sharing my story, I couldn't believe what people started telling me about themselves. And I didn't understand what was happening or why that was, but my relationship started to deepen. I started to meet more people. People started to confide in me, and what I finally realized was with my own vulnerability and authenticity, I created a safe place for other people to share their stories, because ultimately we all just want to be accepted for who we actually are, but we're too afraid to show it, because if people reject us for who we actually are, then where does that leave us? And what I realized is people won't reject us when we show our authentic selves, because it gives them permission to show their authentic selves. And man, those connections, when you finally break free of these crazy masks you think you're supposed to wear, and you connect as one authentic human being to another, there's nothing like it. It's the best feeling in the world, So, and that just, yeah, man, I kind of felt like, okay, I'm like in my 40s and I'm just figuring this out. How is it that of all the adults that I've talked to in my entire life, the thousands of adults, nobody's ever really talked about this, So I thought maybe I'll just start talking about this to people. And that kind of led me to where I am today, where I want to help people see that, vulnerability is the source of our greatest personal power. It's, our authentic selves is one of the greatest gifts that we can give to another human being. And I'm just so passionate about it, because I've seen the impact that it has on people's lives to finally be free of all these crazy self-judgments and limiting beliefs, right? So I just sometimes feel like I want to shout it from the mountaintop.
When you talk about how you started sharing these things, I think I know the answer to this, but for the benefit of anyone listening, what were the things that you were doing to begin sharing your story?
Yeah, so the first thing I did was I started writing, actually. So the first thing I did actually was started writing in a gratitude journal. And I thought, because I read The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. I don't know if you've read that, but probably many of your listeners have, or some of your listeners have. And it really changed my life about the importance of having a morning routine. But so I started writing in a gratitude journal, and I posted it online, like just on a WordPress blog. And I thought, you know what? I mean, I was kind of worried some people would think it was really corny, but I didn't care really. I just thought maybe my simple practice of gratitude, maybe somebody else reading it will help somebody, and that's, if I can, all these people that I kind of had a fear people were going to mock me or whatever, and they didn't. Nobody did. That was another made up fear. And in fact, I started to get some, not a lot, but I started to get some comments from people about the fact that, I really like what you're doing, and I appreciate your gratitude journal. And then as I became more comfortable in the fact that I got used to the idea of having left alcohol behind, and I got used to the idea that I was onto something here that seemed important, I gained more confidence. And so eventually what I did, one of the first things I did to really put myself out there was I was working for a huge global automotive manufacturing company. and 130,000 employees. So I wrote to the health and wellness team there, and they had this newsletter that goes out and all across the world. They print like 20-something thousand copies. And I said, I just want to tell my story here. So, I went pretty big, man. And they were ecstatic about it, of course, because it was like a legit story. So that was probably the first big thing I did. So I shared it with 100,000 people in this company, and the feedback I got was amazing. Like emails from all over the world. People in the company thanking me and telling me their stories, and it's just beautiful. I thought, okay, this is what I need to be doing. And so I started writing. I created a website called From Drunk to Monk, and started chronicling my journey. And as I created the time and space to be sober, a really interesting thing happened 5 years after my wife's death. So about 2 years ago, I started grieving. I finally started grieving her death, and I started writing about her, and I started thinking about her a lot more. And I cried, more than I had ever let myself. And my wife was super supportive in helping me through that and helping me realize what was happening. And I wrote about that too, and that really resonated with people. And then I just continued down that path, and I got really into the idea of wanting to help other people share their stories, because I knew what it had meant to me and I knew what it had meant to other people. So I, created the website, The Book of Open, and it's really a passion project, and I help people share their stories. I want to lower the overhead or the barriers to people sharing their stories. So you don't have to have a blog. I'll do that. I'll help you edit it, and I'll host it for you, and I'll make it look nice, so something you feel good about with nice pictures and all that kind of stuff. So, that's kind of how it started, and it's just blossomed from there.
How did that idea evolve? The Book of Open.
It was just that I felt like sharing my story had meant so much to me. And I know that it meant so much to me because it meant finally taking ownership of it, having the courage to admit the things that I did and to own it. And then doing so helped me move past it. But it also turned what I thought was my greatest weakness into my greatest strength, right? Like I had made all these mistakes and I had all this checkered, history and like difficult times. And it turns out that those stories were really the source of my greatest power to, do good in the world. And so I wanted to help other people do that, really. And I knew that I was becoming so passionate about this subject that I could talk to them in a way that they would feel comfortable to share their stories with me, right? And it's not that I certainly never pressured anybody to put the stories on the website, but I talk to people a lot, to make sure that to help them get to the place where they feel ready to take ownership and share their stories. So, yeah, it just was kind of a organic thing. I didn't really have a plan about it, but it just feels good, really good.
How did that name come about, Jason?
A flash of one of my very few flashes of creative insight. That was it. It just popped into my head.
So you're just taking really the idea of an open book and reversing it, and inviting people in and to send their stories out in a way. Does that sound halfway accurate?
That is completely accurate, yeah.
The Book of Open gets going then online. How do you connect with people to invite them to participate? Where are you finding them?
Oh, yeah. So this is another thing. So, one of the amazing lessons that I've learned is when I first started listening to podcasts, okay, I would always hear these these guys in the podcast, they'd quote this Jim Rohn, famous Jim Rohn quote, "You're the average of the 5 people you hang around with most." And I never knew how to build a network of people. I didn't know how to do that. I thought it meant basically like going to a networking event and standing there with a glass of water and a name tag looking like a dork, making small talk with strangers. So as I started to put my story out there, I started to connect with more people. And then people would reach out to me because what I found, and I'm sure you find the same way, is that people who are entrepreneurs, especially entrepreneurs, many of them already know this stuff, right? They know that being authentic is the way to connect with people, and not all of them, but many of the people I started to meet kind of knew that. And so they would sometimes offer to share their stories. Other people who I knew had good stories, I would just reach out to them on Facebook and ask them if they wanted to share their stories. And, it was just as I met more and more people, I just, I would ask. And it was amazing. And people were very generous and open. And I mean, and it helped them. They would so often tell me afterwards that, wow, that I needed to do that, and because one of the best ways for us to reconcile our past is to, use our experiences to be of service to others and create goodness in the world, So, yeah, it's just kind of evolved like that.
What's happened to you since, or maybe more to the point, how, if at all, have you changed and evolved as the Book of Open has evolved?
Yeah, so, I mean, I've had some great things happen, like as a result of the Book of Open, I had somebody reach out to me. God, it was actually, it was right around this time last year, actually. And this guy's been, he had an author, he had written 8 books, he'd been on Oprah, and he goes, man, I really love what you're doing. His name's Hogan Hilling. I really love what you're doing, and are you interested in writing a book? I said, well, yes, I am interested in writing a book. I think most people probably somewhere inside them are interested in writing a book. And it was funny because I had started writing a book, and I had gotten about 50 pages into it, and I was like, I don't even know what this book is about. I don't know who it's for. It's garbage. I'm not a writer. Forget it. And but this guy was so incredibly generous. He helped me write the book outline. He walked me through the whole process of doing that. He helped me think through the concepts and helped me write up a book proposal. He introduced me to a book publisher, and and the rest is history. And actually, just yesterday, my book hit number 1 on it in its categories in Amazon. So it's pretty crazy, So, so that was one thing, that was and going through that process of writing the book, man, what an experience. Like, that was one of the most profound educational experiences I've gone through, because I'll be honest, I mean, when I started writing the book, I had thoughts and ideas, and I knew I was passionate about the idea of vulnerability, but I wrote a book for fathers on how cultivating vulnerability makes you a stronger, wiser, and more courageous father. And, it's funny. I think people think that when you have to write a book, you need to be like some kind of world-class expert. No, I wasn't a world-class expert. I just knew I had this subject I was passionate about, and I wanted to learn more about it. And writing a book was a wonderful reason to actually sit down and learn more about it. And as I worked through the process, it was amazing, the insights I got. And, it was wonderful. It was really, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was an emotional process, and there was lots of ups and downs and moments where I thought, oh my God, I'm never going to get this done. I can remember, it needed to be about 75,000 words, I think. And I remember being at 10,000 words thinking, well, I have nothing left to say. That's it. What do I do now? And so, yeah, I mean, that was part of the experience. And, I've started as I met new people and built new relationships and started being the type of person that sees opportunities instead of limitations, and realized that when we have the courage to put ourselves out there and to put our own ideas into the marketplace of ideas, they will collide with other people's, and new insights will happen, and new opportunities and things you can't even have imagined. So I'm now hosting mastermind groups. At the beginning of 2016, I didn't know what a mastermind group even was. I mean, as we've launched a family mediation business, Good Family Matters. I believe it has the potential to help so many families navigate a difficult time in their life and come out of it stronger and with a different set of tools to create the life they want. But that wasn't even on my radar until 6 months ago, but so I really realized that I become a person who sees hope and possibilities more so than I ever have been. And that's another message I want to share with people is, there's so many people who, feel trapped in their current situation. They can't see a way out of it, and there is a way out of it. And it starts with you. It starts with you being willing to share your experiences and your stories and learning from them and teaching other people and meeting people and connecting with them and creating new ideas and all of those things. Our lives we are all able to take our lives in these crazy, new, amazing directions. And fundamentally, what it all boils down to is just finding new and different and exciting ways to be of service to people. So, yeah, it's been an amazing, amazing journey.
I want to go back to the formation of the book here for just a second, because there are 2 real distinctions here that I'd like some clarification on. I'm thinking that Hogan probably helped you with the first part of taking all of the whole concept of all the stories and the openness of it, and narrowing that down to the vulnerability with fatherhood, and also the actual name of the book. I'm guessing that those two things probably follow one and the same path. Can you tell me a little bit more about how those two focuses, if I could use that word, developed?
Yeah, so Hogan he writes about fatherhood. He's a passionate advocate for men and fathers. And so that was obviously his, the area he's most passionate about. And I'm passionate about that too. And so, although I wasn't passionate about writing about it at the time, actually, until we talked at length and had many conversations about it. And I realized that, I think I was laboring under the probably very common belief that, my message is so powerful, it's for everyone, right? And which in some ways is true, but that's not really something you write a book about. You need to target your book at a specific audience, and his passion for fatherhood and my passion was really definitely was around parenting. So I thought, yeah, you know what, I can do this. I can really, buy into this idea. And then the name of the book, The Dadly Book of Open, Dadly, the Dadly brand is kind of Hogan's brand. And that was really a joint decision. He didn't help me with any type of, precondition that, I would use that, but it was a helpful tool as a, first-time author with very little name recognition to kind of co-brand my book. I actually see it as a gift that he gave me to be able to sort of leverage that name, So that's kind of where it all came from.
I haven't asked you about how things have changed and how you've communicated about those things with your daughters, and in particular your daughter who was 9 when she confronted you and told you that she was so disappointed. How has that relationship evolved since that point?
Well, I've become a different man, right? So it's really funny, because last summer at the 2-year anniversary of that day, it was funny. I was driving her to get a pair of figure skates, and it struck me that was the 2-year anniversary. And so I pulled the car over and I said, I really want to talk to you about something super important. And I think you probably don't even remember it. I'm sure you don't remember it, which of course you didn't. But I said, you having the courage that day to be honest with me gave me the courage to finally be honest with myself. And I want you to understand that you changed my life in a massive, massive way. And I am so grateful for you. You have no idea. I was grateful for you before, but you at 9 years old changed the whole way your 41-year-old dad's life was going. And I want you to know, think about that for a second. And I want you to know that you have the power. Every one of us has the power to do that for people, to help them see that there is a different way. And I will be eternally grateful. And it was funny because that day that, that I got drunk and she told me she was disappointed, I had told her that, I was going to make her feel really special and all the kind of stuff, and then failed miserably. And when I told her that 2 years later and thanked her so honestly and sincerely, she said, wow, Daddy, you just made me feel really special. And that was a pretty powerful moment. But that, I think, illustrates the type of person I am now, where I talk to my kids about the mistakes I made. I look at writing the book for an example. My daughter, who's now in grade 8, but at the time I was writing the book was in grade 7, and they have to do a grade 8 project at school that basically they work on it all year, and it's this huge project, and it's like they're, so in grade 7, she's only ever seen the finished result of, previous grade 8s, the finished result of the projects, and she's going, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to do something like that, blah, blah, blah. It's too overwhelming. How am I ever going to do that? I'm stressed out about it. And I would be able to use my experiences writing the book, which I was writing at the time, to say, listen, this book, this is my grade 8 project. And let me tell you how I'm feeling right now. I'm scared. I don't feel like anybody's going to read this. I actually think there's a chance it might be so bad that the publisher they'll take a look at it and tear up the contract and won't even print it. But here's how I'm dealing with that. I'm dealing with that by just doing a little bit each day, by believing in myself and knowing that I have this. I will learn as I go through this process how to do this, and I will get better, and I will produce something that is of a really high caliber that I can be proud of. And the same thing will happen to you. So we had it by being open and vulnerable about the feelings I was having. It let her see that we share, as two human beings, we share the same feelings, and that connects us more deeply. And me being able to share them with her makes her know that I can relate to her when she's feeling them, and so she'll be much more likely to come to me when she is feeling those feelings too, because she knows I've been there. I also talk to them about how the parenting sausage is made. Like, God, I don't know. Even though I always joke, I got to get this whole teenager thing right because, geez, I wrote a book about it. I can't screw it up. But man, we all make mistakes, and I'm really open about those mistakes, because sometimes, at every stage of our kids' lives, we're confronted with situations that we've never had to confront before. And we don't always make the right choices, or the choices that we make don't pan out in the way that we think they're going to. And I'm really, really open with my kids about that. Oops, geez, here's what I was actually thinking, and here's how it turned out. And, I'm sorry, that's just not what I meant. But by me doing that, it makes me human, it makes me real, and it also gives them a whole bunch of useful information and experiences that they can carry forward into their relationships with their own kids when they have them, So it's really become, more open and more honest and more, it's just a deeper connection. We have a really wonderful relationship. I'm really fortunate. And I know that my vulnerability and authenticity is the cornerstone of that relationship.
What you just described over the last couple minutes, Jason, I think plays back to exactly where we started, of just being so open with each other, and how you just mentioned about how when the time comes that they have their own kids, if they have their own kids, and now these ideas roll forward generation after generation. I wonder what things will look like in these kinds of relationships long after guys like you and I are gone. But rather than that being a dark thought, I find that to be a really hopeful feeling. Do you?
Yes, I do. I really do. I don't have much more to say about it, actually. I just really do.
Yeah. So what's next?
Well, I think what's next, for me, on a professional level is, I want to continue to find new ways to serve people, right? I think what I'm really passionate about now is helping people understand, developing deep confidence in themselves. I've really become interested in vulnerability. I really believe is a cornerstone of my philosophy, but I want to come up with actionable ways to incorporate vulnerability into our lives, or show people, the outcomes that can result from cultivating vulnerability. So, building powerful relationships. I think so many of us go through life and we think, man, how do we build relationships with people? Or we don't even understand the importance of building relationships. You hear people say things like, well, so-and-so got that job because it's who you know. Yeah, right. That's how it works, right? That is how it works. I want people to see that they have a massive amount of untapped capability through their experiences and insights and passions to be of service to people and to create opportunities outside the path where they normally might have, the linear path, which they normally think that they need to achieve their goals, like climbing the corporate ladder or getting, all those things. There's a whole different world of ways you can move forward. And so there's that, and I want to continue to work on and grow Good Family Matters with my partner, Carl, into a thriving business that is helping families navigate not just, a difficult time in their life. I believe we will be able to save people. I believe that for those that we can't, we will be able to give people a set of tools that they can carry forward into their lives and help them create something different from where they came from. And I'm just super, super passionate about it. And I get excited every time I talk about it. So, I think that's what's next. And maybe I'll write another book at some point, but, not right now.
I'd like to have Carl, and maybe you and Carl together, even to just talk specifically about that. As you know, I'm passionate about that as well, and I'm really enthusiastic and supportive of what the two of you are doing. And you've touched on some things that hit some nerves for me as well, with just relationships and communication. And, we teach each other how to do basic reading and arithmetic, but we never really equip ourselves to understand how to communicate effectively as other human beings, and understand that we all have our own perspectives, whether we're 9 years old or whether we're 41 or whether we're 101. And, you talked about how at one point in your life that you felt like having feelings made you less of a man. That's not exactly what you said, but I'm paraphrasing. And all of these things, I on one hand, I see, a tidal wave of things that have towed up so many of us under. But on the other hand, I see so many lights going on and people going, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, I see it now. Let's be, to use your word, vulnerable and authentic about it with our kids. And let's start cultivating this now, because when you take it in that context, I feel like we've almost barely even begun as far as evolving as emotionally intelligent beings. And I don't mean to sound way off into outer space there, but I'm guessing you know exactly what I'm referring to.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I love the passion that you talk about it with, because I know that you've realized this too, right? But I mean, I can remember hearing, IQ versus EQ and thinking that was gibberish, so I look at my kids and I agree. I mean, I think that with our ability to access information and learn different points of view and meet new people and try new things and test out our ideas and, be able to try new things without all this overhead. It's never been easier to start a business with basically no overhead and get feedback about whether it's working, or to share your story or whatever. People are learning that it is the path. Being vulnerable and authentic is the path to building a better relationship with yourself, building a better relationship with those that are closest to you, and meeting new people who you can create just things you could never have imagined creating with. So, I can't, like I said it earlier, and I honestly, I feel like my kids have a 30-year head start on me, and I'm so grateful because I can't wait to see what they do with it. It's the next generation of kids. I mean, I guess it's like this for every generation of kids, but they're going to be different. They really are. I see my kids as really, not falling into, tribes and groups and all of those things. Like, I don't know if it was like that when you went to high school. For me, it was, everybody was in their own little clique and, nobody would ever cross paths with one another. And it's not, my kids don't think that way at all. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I cannot wait to see what they do with it. And I think there's a wonderful revolution happening in understanding ourselves and understanding how to best interact with and serve each other.
Well, it's that spirit and that of creation and sharing ourselves authentically that ran you and I right smack into each other, right? And
sure did.
It's amazing how when you come across somebody on that path that you literally feel that sort of spirit and soul connection. Like, I feel like I've been connected to this person all the way along, and yet, here's only the realization of the physical manifestation of it, I guess I'll call it. But it's really been a pleasure, and I look forward to a good long friendship and collaboration, and who knows what we'll maybe come up with together at some point. But in the meantime, Jason, thank you so much for spending this time with me today and for sharing what you did of your story, and I look forward to more discussions down the road.
It's been an honor to be on your show, and I wish you nothing but success, and I'm sure we're going to become good friends down the road. I can't wait.
You can connect with Jason online at thebookofopen.com. Thebookofopen, all one word, .com. If you can remember that phrase, you'll be able to find Jason on social media. On Facebook, it's facebook.com/thebookofopen. Same handle, Twitter, at The Book of Open. Instagram, he's at The Book of Open. And on YouTube, he's got a channel up there as well. Just search Jason MacKenzie, or if you go to his website, you can click the link there. I'll make sure that I post a link to his YouTube channel on the show notes blog post for this episode as well at noscheduleman.com. This is episode 36. The Dadley Book of Open is available now. You can find it on Amazon. And again, I'll make sure that I've got a link posted from the show blog for episode 36 at noscheduleman.com. Or, of course, you can find it on Jason's site too, thebookofopen.com. If you get his book, please do shoot him a note, leave him a review, pass it along. Sharing the book. We can never have too many good fathers out there, in my opinion. So please help spread the word. If this resonates with you and you think that there's somebody that will benefit from being turned on to what Jason is doing, please do let them know. Thank you for that. Meantime, you can reach me at kevinbolmer.com. NoScheduleman.com takes you to the same place. All my social channel links are up there on the upper right-hand side, as is my email list sign-up. I hope you'll join me on this journey and add your voice to mine. I'd love to have your company along the way. Thanks again for listening. I hope you'll join me next week on the No Schedule Man podcast.
Just a little deja vu.